Banff is sold as clean mountain air, turquoise lakes, glacier light, pine forests that look untouched. Then the trail bends, and the postcard breaks. Concrete walls, old foundations, the industrial bones of a coal town called Bankhead, not near the park boundary. Inside it, in the early 1900s, this quiet place sounded nothing like wilderness. Smoke, steam, rail cars, machinery, and black dust settling against the same mountain backdrop tourists came to admire. When we call this the toxic mine Canada tried to forget, toxic means that coal-age reality, soot-choked industry inside a landscape later marketed as pristine wilderness. There were no secret shafts or modern cover-up. The disappearance was quieter than that and more revealing. Buildings were removed, ruins weathered, trees swallowed the concrete, and a town large enough to leave a scar almost vanished from Banff's public image. So the question is simple. Why was a coal empire built inside the park, and why did it have to disappear? That map pin is the first clue. Bankhead was not an accidental ruin on the edge of wilderness. It was a deliberate industrial project inside a national park. So its disappearance has to be read like a sequence, not a rumor. Follow the sequence and three pressures appear. The railway, Canadian Pacific, brought tourists into Banff, but its locomotives also needed reliable fuel, and local coal looked practical. The coal itself, Bankhead's anthracite, had a flaw that turned a promising mine into a costly engineering problem, leaving the concrete plant ruins still visible today. And the park image, as Banff's identity shifted towards scenery, leisure, and protected wilderness, a soot-black company town sat awkwardly inside the frame. Erased does not mean hidden bunker or proof of a modern toxic cover-up. Buildings were dismantled, some moved by rail to nearby communities. Foundations stayed, and forest filled the spaces between them. The mystery is not whether Bankhead existed. Records, maps, and ruins say it did. The harder question is how a town built to power access to Banff became incompatible with the version of Banff Canada wanted the world to see. To answer that, start with the railway that sold the mountains while feeding on coal. The railway that sold the mountains while feeding on coal was not a contradiction on paper. It was how the system worked. Canadian Pacific did more than lay track through the Rockies. It turned a rail stop into a destination. A remote place could now be reached by timetable, brochure, hotel lobby, and observation car. Banff's early public image grew through that system. Peaks as scenery, hot springs as retreat, wilderness made reachable by rail. Behind every scenic journey was the fuel ledger. Steam locomotives did not run on mountain air. They needed fire. They burned coal by the tender load, and a railway crossing long distances through difficult country needed dependable fuel. So local coal looked like infrastructure, not intrusion. If it could be mined close to the line, it could feed locomotives carrying passengers, freight, workers, timber, supplies, and the idea of Banff itself. That is why Bankhead made sense. Through the Pacific Coal Company, Canadian Pacific developed a mine inside the park boundary because the railway empire needed energy, while teaching the public to see these mountains as beauty and escape. The same system produced the clean travel poster and the black coal dust, the resort journey, and the mine that helped power it. Bankhead was part of the machinery that made Banff accessible. And once the railway chose to build there, it did not build a temporary camp, it built a town. By 1903, that choice was turning into streets, houses, and routines. Bankhead was a company town, built around one purpose: getting coal out of the mountain and onto Canadian Pacific's railway system. But it was not a scatter of shacks beside a mine entrance. It became a substantial settlement inside the park, with a population that reached about 1,000 people at its peak. For an early 20th century town in the Rockies, Bankhead was strikingly modern. Records and park histories describe electricity, running water, a school, stores, churches, social halls, and a hockey rink. At night, this was a town with lit windows, shift changes, children walking to class, miners coming home blackened by coal dust, and families living by the whistle. The town map carried company town logic. The mine and railway sat at the center. Housing, services, wages, and daily life all bent toward the same industrial machine. If the mine worked, the town worked. If it faltered, everything became vulnerable. That makes Bankhead's disappearance more than a hiking trail curiosity. Banff absorbed the footprint of a real community with infrastructure, institutions, and memory. On paper, Bankhead looked solid. The weakness was not in the lit streets above ground, it was in the coal seam beneath them. The coal beneath Bankhead looked like the solution. In practice, it kept breaking apart. The mine produced anthracite, a hard, high-carbon coal that could be valuable fuel. On paper, that suited a railway system needing steady heat for locomotives. But much of Bankhead's coal was friable. It broke apart too easily. Instead of coming out as solid, handleable lumps, a significant amount crumbled into fines. Small fragments, grit, and black dust. That mattered because coal was not useful just because it existed in a seam. It had to survive blasting, hauling, sorting, loading, and shipping. It had to reach a firebox in a form that could be handled efficiently, so the mine needed a factory to fix what the mine produced. In 1905, a briquetting plant was constructed to turn fine coal into usable fuel blocks. The principle was straightforward. Collect the fines, mix them with a binder, press them into shape, and create something that burned more like lump coal. But the binder was not free, and it was not waiting in the mountains. Bankhead used imported coal tar pitch. That imported binder changes the meaning of the concrete in the trees. The massive concrete remains are not random leftovers. They are the footprint of an expensive workaround. A factory built because the mountain gave CPR coal that was useful but physically stubborn. Every ton through that system meant extra handling, machinery, maintenance, and an imported ingredient before it became dependable railway fuel. Above ground were electricity, schools, and streets. Below, the business depended on coal that kept turning into dust. Once that dust required a plant, a binder, and constant processing, Bankhead's strength began to look like a liability. Soon, those costs met pressure from the workers themselves. That worker pressure is where the story stops looking like a simple engineering problem. Bankhead's trouble did not arrive as one clean event. It stacked up. First came the geology, coal that broke too easily, creating fines that needed extra processing. Then the briquetting plant, more machinery, more handling, and imported coal tar pitch to turn dust back into usable fuel. Every fix made the operation more complicated. Then came labor instability. Bankhead saw strikes in 1911, again in 1919, and again in 1920. Those dates matter because they did not replace the coal problem. They landed on top of it. A mine already fighting its own material was also facing interrupted production, tense negotiations, and a workforce pushing back against industry conditions and economics. So the coal ran out is too neat. The company simply walked away is too neat, too. Bankhead was squeezed from below by the mountain, from inside by labor conflict, and from outside by the changing value of Banff itself. By the 1910s and early 1920s, Banff was becoming more powerful as an image. Clean air, mountain scenery, hotels, rail travel, and a national park sold as escape. Against that picture, Bankhead was the wrong kind of proof. Smoke, dust, tipples, coal cars, and industrial noise inside the frame of wilderness. Tourism alone did not kill the mine. Workers alone did not kill it. Geology alone did not kill it. All three pressures converged until the town's reason for existing no longer made sense. By 1922, Bankhead had become incompatible with the Banff that Canada and the railway were learning to present to the world. A town built around a mine was about to have the mine switched off. When the switch came, Bankhead did not become a ruin overnight. On June 15, 1922, the Bankhead mine officially closed. The machinery that gave the town its rhythm went quiet. The coal cars, the tipple, the plant built to rescue coal that kept crumbling in the company's hands. For residents, closure meant more than a ledger entry. A company town had lost the purpose holding its streets together. But this was not simple abandonment. After the shutdown, many residential buildings were moved out. Houses were lifted, loaded, and carried by rail toward Banff and Canmore, where useful buildings could be absorbed into communities with a future. The railway that made Bankhead possible helped take it apart. That changes the ruins today. If you walk the lower Bankhead site expecting a complete ghost town, the missing pieces can feel confusing. Where are the rows of homes? Where is the lived-in town of families, shops, routines, and winter nights under electric light? Much of it did not weather away. It was scattered. Some former Bankhead houses are reported to have survived in nearby towns as private residences, folded into ordinary streets and lives. That should be handled carefully. These are not museum props or targets on a map. The point is that Bankhead's memory did not stay neatly inside Bankhead. What remained at the original site was mostly what no one could easily carry away. Concrete foundations, industrial walls, the bones of the briquetting plant, the boiler house, the lamp house, and the outline of a town whose wooden body had been removed. The disappearance was physical and spatial. The town was redistributed. Its houses moved into Banff and Canmore. Its workers and families moved into other futures. Its industrial skeleton stayed in the trees, stripped of the daily life that once made the place legible. Most visitors meet Bankhead this way now, not as a town, but as a trail. You walk through trees where streets once ran, past concrete edges that look almost geological until a sign explains them. A foundation becomes a lamp house. A wall becomes part of a boiler house. The briquetting plant, built to rescue crumbling coal from its weakness, becomes the clearest clue that this quiet forest was once an industrial machine. At first, it can look like nature simply taking back what industry abandoned. And nature is part of it. Roots split old concrete. Moss softens sharp lines. Pine needles cover ground once marked by coal dust and foot traffic. But Bankhead did not become this landscape by weather alone. First, the mine lost its economic reason to exist. Then the town's portable wooden pieces were removed. Then the remaining industrial structures became ruins, stabilized, fenced where necessary, and eventually interpreted for the public. A working extraction site became a managed memory inside a national park. That distinction matters because national parks are not just places where nature survives. They are places where people decide what kind of nature the public is supposed to see. Roads, trails, signs, scenic viewpoints, safety barriers, demolished buildings, and preserved ruins all shape the story a landscape tells. In Banff, the public story increasingly centered on mountains, forests, lakes, recreation, and clean air. Bankhead belonged to an earlier, dirtier chapter: soot, rail fuel, cracked anthracite, labor unrest, and company town infrastructure inside the same park boundary. The modern forest is not fake. The mountains are not stage scenery. The wilderness people come for is real. But it is not untouched in the simple way a postcard can imply. At Bankhead, wilderness was also selected, cleaned up, framed, and explained. The town was not restored to nothing. It was turned into interpretation. Once you see that, the ruins become the key to reading the landscape, proof that Banff's beauty and Banff's industrial past occupied the same ground. This is why the concrete matters. At first, they look like a mistake in the forest, an industrial ruin where Banff's wilderness image says there should be only mountains, pines, and clean alpine air. But Bankhead did not vanish because of one dramatic collapse. It disappeared because several pressures met in the same place. Coal that broke too easily, a costly plant built to make that coal usable, labor conflict that exposed how fragile the operation already was, and a park economy moving towards scenery, recreation, and tourism. When the mine closed in 1922, the town's purpose closed with it. Houses moved down the rail line. The industrial core stayed behind. Then the forest returned around what was too heavy, too useful as evidence, or too embedded to remove. Banff's wilderness is not a lie. The lakes, ridgelines, and quiet trails are real. But Bankhead shows that real landscapes can still be curated. They can be cleaned, renamed, replanted, interpreted, and remembered selectively. The empire underneath did not disappear completely. It became concrete under moss, a buried reminder that even the most beautiful places can have an industrial history beneath the view.